We are a nation of incredible, decent, faithful, and peace-loving citizens.
For decades, the United States has operated under the comfortable, almost unshakable assumption that its food supply is completely secure, entirely self-sustaining, and invulnerable to foreign interference. When Americans look at their country's vast economic power, they point to the endless fields of the Midwest, the massive corn and soybean yields, and the hyper-efficient agricultural engine that effortlessly feeds hundreds of millions of people at home and abroad. It is a crowning achievement of modern industrialization. But beneath that rich, dark, fertile soil lies a staggering structural vulnerability that Washington has quietly ignored for far too long. Modern farming on a massive commercial scale is mathematically impossible without a specific, critical chemical ingredient known as potash, and the United States produces almost none of it. Instead, America relies on imports for nearly its entire supply, and an overwhelming majority of that life-saving mineral comes from a single neighbor, Canada. Right now, a brewing trade war, escalating geopolitical tensions, and a sudden shift in how nations leverage their natural resources are threatening to choke off this vital pipeline. This quiet crisis is putting the entire American agricultural system on the brink of an unprecedented catastrophe, exposing the raw friction point between national sovereignty and global economic interdependence. To truly understand the danger, you have to look at how modern agriculture actually functions behind the scenes, away from the idyllic imagery of traditional family farms. Soil is not a magical, infinite resource that automatically regenerates its properties year after year. Every single harvest systematically strips the ground of vital, life-sustaining nutrients that must be artificially replaced if you want to keep crop yields high enough to sustain our population. Potash, a potassium-rich salt mineral, is the absolute king of these nutrients. It is directly responsible for strengthening plant roots, improving water retention, resisting crop diseases, and maximizing the sheer volume of food output per acre. The terrifying reality for American farmers is that over 90% of the potash used in U.S. fields is shipped in from foreign nations, and roughly 80% of that entire supply originates from the massive underground mining networks of Saskatchewan, Canada. Gigantic industrial operations north of the border hold a near monopoly on the fuel that keeps American farms alive. For an American agricultural sector that is already bleeding cash from skyrocketing diesel prices, expensive equipment maintenance, high interest rates, and erratic weather patterns, even a minor trade disruption or a retaliatory tariff on Canadian minerals could trigger an economic landslide. If the potash stops moving across the border, crop yields plunge, farming costs explode, and the shockwaves travel instantly from the fields straight to the supermarket checkout line. What makes this situation an absolute geopolitical nightmare is that international players are now realizing just how exposed the American supply chain truly is. This is no longer a quiet, polite dispute between two neighboring trading partners. Major European powers have begun analyzing America's structural blind spots, and agriculture is at the very top of their list. Intelligence reports suggest that foreign officials have been meticulously mapping out the exact sectors where the United States is entirely dependent on external suppliers. They quickly identified that by holding strategic stakes in international mining conglomerates, foreign governments can gain indirect, suffocating leverage over the food security of the United States. It extends far beyond fertilizer into specialty chemicals, automated farming machinery, and essential technology components that American industries cannot replicate overnight. Washington has spent the last half-century assuming that geopolitical superiority automatically meant total economic independence, but a hyper-globalized world has completely flipped the script, leaving the world's superpower shockingly reliant on the decisions of foreign boardrooms and international trade policies. In a desperate bid to neutralize this leverage and find a counterweight to Canada's near monopoly, political leaders in Washington have begun eyeing highly controversial and incredibly risky alternatives across the globe. One of the most shocking developments involves sudden, quiet negotiations with politically volatile nations in Eastern Europe, specifically Belarus, which controls a massive portion of the global state-run potash market through its state-owned enterprises. In an effort to secure an alternative source of fertilizer outside of Canadian control, policymakers have even floated the idea of easing heavy economic sanctions on these authoritarian regimes in exchange for stable mineral exports. But industry analysts are sounding the alarm, warning that this is an incredibly dangerous gamble. Trading a stable, democratic, and deeply integrated North American partnership for a heavy reliance on a politically unstable government closely aligned with global adversaries is a recipe for disaster. Critics point out that trying to bypass Canada by sourcing from volatile regions won't save American farmers. It will ultimately punish them, driving operational costs to historic highs and artificially inflating the price of everyday food items for families who are already struggling to get by. The financial leverage in this fight is so massive that it threatens to spill over from the agricultural sector into the broader global economy. It isn't just about the physical minerals moving across the border. It's about the hundreds of billions of dollars in investment capital tied to these industries. Major international funds and corporate giants hold nearly $1 trillion in American infrastructure, manufacturing, and technology. If trading relationships continue to sour, foreign nations can easily choose to pull that capital out of Wall Street and redirect it entirely into domestic projects like local energy production, high-tech manufacturing hubs, and independent supply chains. Even a minor shift in where this massive pool of money is invested could send shockwaves through the American financial system, driving up borrowing costs for businesses and severely damaging long-term market confidence. We are officially entering a brand new era of economic warfare where raw industrial size no longer guarantees absolute control. The old playbook of using economic sanctions and tariffs as a one-way street is completely dead because the global economy has become an intricate, fragile web of mutual reliance. Canada holds the keys to the fertilizer that keeps American crops growing, Europe dominates the highly advanced technologies required to manufacture essential goods, and international investors hold the financial strings to domestic markets. These dependencies weren't built overnight, but they are now being actively studied as weaponized leverage points for future conflicts. The ultimate question hanging over the global economy is no longer whether our closest allies have the power to disrupt the American system, but rather how quickly they will pull the trigger if a full-scale trade war erupts. The vulnerability of the American food supply chain highlights a broader issue that economic strategists call the globalization trap. For decades, corporations chased efficiency, outsourcing heavy mining, chemical refining, and manufacturing to whichever country could do it cheapest. This worked beautifully for corporate balance sheets, keeping consumer goods cheap and profits high. However, it completely hollowed out the domestic production capabilities of Western nations. Now, as the geopolitical climate shifts from open cooperation to intense competition, the hidden costs of that outsourcing are being laid bare. It takes years, sometimes decades, and hundreds of billions of dollars to build the infrastructure required to mine potash, refine rare earth elements, or manufacture cutting-edge semiconductors. You cannot simply flip a switch and bring these industries back to American soil. Until those domestic capabilities are rebuilt, the United States remains at the mercy of global supply chains that can be disrupted by a single political decision, a labor strike, or a military conflict half a world away. The agricultural crisis is just the first warning sign of a much larger structural realignment that will redefine global power in the 21st century. If you want to stay ahead of the curve on the major trade shifts, industrial updates, and global stories transforming our world, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all notifications so you never miss our next deep dive analysis. Do you think the United States has dangerously underestimated its dependence on foreign supply chains for basic survival needs like food production? Could an aggressive trade conflict completely upend the agricultural industry? Or will nations find a way to cooperate before it hits our grocery stores? Which sector do you believe is facing the most critical long-term threat right now? Agriculture, heavy manufacturing, or high technology? Drop your thoughts, perspectives, and insights in the comments section below, and let's keep this conversation going.